Hello folks, and welcome to the Darktable Landscapes video. In this one I am taking a look at this image taken in Glenafric up in Scotland, and I'd like to look at it in two different ways. There's the kind of the more common landscape way at the moment of maximum dynamic range, pulling detail out of shadows, ensuring we're not clipping details and highlights. And then there's the more kind of stylized way that you might see from the likes of, say, Finn Beals or James Popsis on YouTube, that's not so concerned with the data capture side of things, where you're kind of ensuring that things aren't clipped and all that kind of thing, and more just going for the look you want to take. There's a certain kind of camera club mentality that can reduce photography to just a data capturing exercise, you know, making sure you're not clipping anything, making sure you're not losing details in the shadows, and then judging a photo based on those qualities rather than on the artistic qualities. So I'd like to take a look at how we can kind of process one photo in those two different ways and seeing which ones we like, which ones we prefer. And there's certainly some value in that because for the most part, if we're just shooting at, say, golden hour, we're almost limited to that kind of high dynamic range approach of not clipping highlights and so on by the conditions. We're limited by those conditions. And that kind of precludes the rest of the day for shooting, really. Once you kind of outside that and you can't make those dramatic golden hour images anymore, you either pack up and go home, or you make the best of the conditions that you've got. I'm certainly guilty of that, and I'm trying to change my style a little bit more so that I can shoot for longer in the day and still be pleased with the results. So I'm looking to process this image, which was taken relatively early in the morning, but not quite in the golden hour. There's too much cloud around for golden hour. And I'm just going to take it in two different directions and see where we end up. So first we'll do the standard kind of dramatic way of pulling down highlights, making sure that we're not clipping in our shadows, and then we'll go for the more artistic style, if you like. So first things first, you can see that our histogram here is kind of all stretched out, and the blue channel here is kind of way out on its own, which suggests to me we need to do some color calibration. So let's sort the white balance out with automatic. That's very orange. This was taken in September in Scotland, so kind of early autumn. Things are starting to turn brown, but this looks a bit too orange for me, so let's just pull it back towards the blue a little bit. You can see how it goes orange that way, so we'll pull it back towards blue for a slightly more natural result. Okay, and then we'll pull up our exposure. So about maybe +1 EV. We can see now that we're starting to lose detail in the sky. So following our normal kind of processing method, we're going to pull that back. So we'll make a new exposure instance, and we'll use a parametric mask to select the sky. We'll remove the darker values from the selection, soften it off a little bit. We'll go drawn and parametric and just make sure we're not selecting the lock here. And we'll feather. Pop our mask preview off and drop our exposure. So now we're pulling back that detail in the sky. Okay. Now we'll just hop into Sigmoid and just see what we can do here. Move our skew a little bit. Raise our target black. Maybe some more contrast. And then we'll go into color balance RGB. Up our vibrance. A bit more contrast. Do a little bit of saturation grading. We drop our shadows a touch. Drop our highlights more. Boost our mids. And we've got quite a lot of oranges in the image. This tree here and all this heather and grass down here. So let's go for a complementary kind of slight purple tone in the shadows to do a little bit of complementary color work. Maybe drop our vibrance a touch. And then we'll do contrast equalizer for clarity. Roll our mouse wheel down, drag up the graph as usual. There we go. And some texture, pulling up each end. It's an interesting place, Glenafric. It's a beautiful spot, but it's very hard to photograph, I found when I was there, because as you can see along here, there's a very high deer fence. so you can't really get down to the loch side very easily. And if you are here, you're kind of wading through knee-deep heather and deer grass, and we have a big problem with ticks here in the UK with the amount of deer in Scotland and sheep. There are a lot of ticks. Global warming, it's not really killing off the ticks in the winter that it used to, so I'm always wary of wading through deep heather and stuff like this, but I don't think I picked up any nasty little visitors this time around. But yeah, tricky place to photograph. You're kind of limited to where you can go, what angles you can get. But we've added some texture now. I think we do need to take some of the colour out of this orange. It's intense to the point of being distracting. So let's do colour equalizer. And we'll just pop our picker on an orange zone, which is more or less bang on that one. So we're on our saturation tab. Drop it a little bit. Not too much. Let's go for about there. We'll maybe up our saturation in, say, the purple of the heather, which is going to be probably in this area here. So let's just pull that up there. Okay. And now we can do, let's have a look, a vignette. So we'll have another exposure. Don't really need to search for that one, but never mind. Now we'll do a drawn mask, an ellipse, pop that on, invert it with the polarity button there, drop it down. Probably about there. Make sure we're feathering. And then we'll sharpen. So diffuse and sharpen, right click, no AA filter, then a new instance, right click, and let's go lens deblur soft. I think we've got enough there. And one thing you often see when you're doing some sharpening, when you have water like this with kind of fine waves, small waves, it can tend to look kind of pixely at smaller viewing sizes. So you can kind of get away with doing a kind of a in-processing long exposure effect. I'm going to turn off diffuse and sharpen for now to stop my processor from melting in my machine. I'm going to make a new instance of the contrast equalizer, and I'm going to select, using a drawn and parametric mask, I'm going to first select the loch. So we'll go around here like this, and I'm not being too precise because we'll use a parametric mask to limit this as well. So if I turn on the preview, you can see we're just selecting inside this shape. And now I'm going to use the hue parameter and this plus eyedropper tool, kind of selects a range, and this will allow us to select a range of hues to mask to. So we're going to click on there, and we're going to click and drag a box on the loch, and then we'll find that just inside, more or less, if I shift and roll my feathering in as well, so we're not selecting the trees, we're selecting the loch pretty precisely. We do have some kind of speckling, so let's feather that as well, blur it as well, and up the contrast. There we go. So now we're selecting the loch pretty precisely, and essentially we're going to apply negative clarity to this. So shift and, or just roll the mouse wheel. Shift, I've got the setting which allows me to roll my mouse wheel to scroll, so I hold shift to change that size. Your mileage may vary depending on your settings, but I'm going to roll that area of effect out nice and big and then drop it down, and what you'll find is that that water will start to kind of smooth out, which looks somewhat like a long exposure. So that's pretty good. Now we can go back and turn our diffuse and sharpen on for our sharpening. And we'll turn off our contrast equalizer so we don't have that shape. And so there's our image done in my kind of standard high contrast, pulling in details everywhere we can way. I think actually what I just need to do before I really underline it is denoise it. So I've taken ISO 800. I was obviously too lazy to get my tripod out on that particular morning. But there's our finished shot in the kind of the standard way that you've seen me do a dozen times now already at least. So now we'll look at processing the same image, but with a more stylized approach. So I'm back in the light table view. I've got my image that I've just processed here, and I'm going to go over to the side here and click duplicate. So this doesn't actually duplicate the file, it just makes a new entry in Darktable's internal database and makes a new sidecar file so that you can process one image as many times as you like without completely filling up your hard drive. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to discard the history from this one, so we're starting from a clean slate, and then we'll go in and process this. So again, we'll start in much the same way. We'll set our white balance, and again it's a little too orange. I think that's fine. And then we'll do exposure again, but this time we're going to work on the basis that the clouds really aren't adding much to this image. There's not a great deal of detail there. So as opposed to recovering any tiny little bit of detail on the assumption that more detail is better, I'm just going to kind of let them overexpose and lose detail. Let's go right up to say 1.8. Don't worry too much about the rest of the image because we'll pull that back in a minute. We'll go for sigmoid. Contrast is pretty fine. I'll lift up the blacks. It's okay. And then we'll do color balance RGB. This is where we'll kind of fix a few things. So I'm actually going to drop vibrance a little bit for this version. I will bump up contrast though. Similar little bit of saturation grading. And let's drop our highlights a touch. Drop our mids, definitely drop our shadows. Maybe not drop our mids too much. In fact, maybe even raise my mids. Yeah, we'll go for a kind of high key look. I'll not recover the highlights too much. And then we'll do some color grading. So, you know, this kind of more stylized style color grading is more brought to the fore. And let's drop our reds. We've got a lot of red in this image and it's a little bit too much. So we'll shift our red hue just to a little more kind of a brown, if you like. And then we'll drop our purity, say 12 or so. And then we'll go for green hue. Let's drop that down a touch towards the yellow and up our green purity to say 28 or so. Move our blue hue towards cyan. Yeah, and increase our blue purity as well. Okay, and then we'll go to our color equalizer again because our orange is still very, very strong. So let's just use the slider here. And I think we probably need a little bit more contrast than we've got. There we go. And let's go for, maybe go for a tone equalizer as well, just to kind of target some contrast. We'll go to the masking tab, magic wands, to make sure we're using the right exposure mask. Maybe just drop this down, this darker tone here. There we go. And we'll vignette. Not quite as dramatic a vignette as I would normally do, just a more subtle one. Stretch that out a little bit sideways. We'll add some clarity, but not too much, I think. So I'll just use my preset here. Just pull out a little bit of detail. I'm not going to bother much with texture, I don't think. I think I'll leave it for now. It's not essential. And then we'll sharpen as before. No EA filter. And soft lens deblur. And frame on this one as well, which I may do on the other one too. And I think our vignette is probably kind of pulling into some of this cloud in the corner, which I'd like to avoid. I want this to be more or less just completely whited out. So let's go back to, I'm just going to put my diffusion sharpen off again for performance reasons. Go back to my vignette, and I'm going to use a drawn and parametric. And I'll just remove it from the higher tones. There we go. So we're only vignetting the darker areas. And go back to color balance RGB. I may even just bring up my highlights a little bit more for a very high key look. And you can see that what that's done is kind of removed the distraction of the sky, if you like. We're composing and we're often processing to remove things from the scene that we don't want to emphasize. And that's one way of doing it. There's not much in the sky that, you know, is really that interesting. It wasn't an amazingly sunlit sky. So why emphasize it at all on a midday kind of shot? Just kind of let it go into white, and then the rest of the scene stands for itself. Okay, so here are our two images side by side. I don't think one is particularly better than the other. I think it obviously depends on your personal taste to a certain extent, but also on your intended kind of audience, your intended use case, who you're going to be kind of marketing it to, if you like, where it's going to be displayed. And I think it's interesting just to be able to kind of go back to your archive, have a look at where you can process things differently to your normal workflow, if you like, and perhaps with an eye to not always recovering all the detail you can and maximizing dynamic range where you can. So do have a go, have a look through and see what you can do with your own images, and maybe even shoot some new ones with kind of this approach in mind. And if you like this one, do like and subscribe, of course. And thank you for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.